We started working with Oracle licensing over 15 years ago, and we've always been passionate about our work with licensing and contracts. Back when we started working at Oracle, we realized very quickly that Oracle had an advantage. They knew all the contracts and licensing rules, all while its customers were in a disadvantage with limited access to the very same information. We want to level the playing field by changing that. We often get asked, why do you share? Our philosophy is pretty simple, and it's always been, if you do good things will happen. To us, there are two groups of people out there. One group who will watch our videos, attend our training, and use that knowledge to better manage their Oracle software, and that's great. But there will also be people who need our Oracle licensing expertise. It's a win-win.
Oracle licensing is challenging and difficult. Almost no company in the world is able to stay compliant with their Oracle software licenses. But there are a few companies out there that have succeeded in remaining compliant with Oracle. We are obsessed with finding those companies, speak with them to understand how were they successful, and then we want to teach it to everybody else. The challenge with learning about Oracle licensing has always been that the few who had the knowledge did not want to share it with others. We want to be different. We want to share knowledge that we have, whatever knowledge that we gain, so that others can benefit from this knowledge as well. That is our mission.
Hello and welcome to our training session on Oracle ULAs. I am Fredrik Philipson. With me, Morten Andersson. Hello, Anne. Nice to see you again. I can see we have 25 people here. Let's give everybody 2 minutes before we start. And while we start, Morten, let's watch our mission video one more time while people are connecting to it. And Morten will start after this video.
We started working with Oracle licensing over 15 years ago, and we've always been passionate about our work with licensing and contracts. Back when we started working at Oracle, we realized very quickly that Oracle had an advantage. They knew all the contracts and licensing rules, all while its customers were in a disadvantage with limited access to the very same information. We want to level the playing field by changing that. We often get asked, why do you share? Our philosophy is pretty simple, and it's always been, if you do good things will happen. To us, there are two groups of people out there. One group who will watch our videos, attend our training, and use that knowledge to better manage their Oracle software, and that's great. But there will also be people who need our Oracle licensing expertise. It's a win-win.
Oracle licensing is challenging and difficult. Almost no company in the world is able to stay compliant with their Oracle software licenses. But there are a few companies out there that have succeeded in remaining compliant with Oracle. We are obsessed with finding those companies, speak with them to understand how were they successful, and then we want to teach it to everybody else. The challenge with learning about Oracle licensing has always been that the few who had the knowledge did not want to share it with others. We want to be different. We want to share knowledge that we have, whatever knowledge that we gain, so that others can benefit from this knowledge as well. That is our mission.
Great.
Hello again. So, Morten, I hand it over to you.
Thank you. So, welcome everybody. It's good to see that there's people from, again, all around the world, which is really nice to see. I hope you enjoyed our video. We're very proud of it. So, we are going to talk about ULAs today. So, let me just get this presentation going. So we're going to be talking about the ULAs, we're going to be talking about perpetual ULAs, and we're going to be talking about pool of funds. So I'm going to start out this session, and just about halfway, we're going to hand it over to Fredrik, who's going to take you through the second half. And just a reminder here, do join with us. This is all about sharing knowledge to get connected into this Oracle licensing community. Please follow us on LinkedIn, join on our LinkedIn web page and YouTube, wherever we connect. That's the way to go. So today's agenda. So we're going to start out with the ULA basics. We're going to talk about the ULA life cycle. And then we're going to have a look at a real ULA contract, just to see what it actually looks like and go through some of the important terms and conditions. We're going to talk about some of the important compliance risk, common compliance risk, and then we're going to move into perpetual ULA and the pool of funds. That's part is going to be Fredrik that's going to be looking at that. And this is what we won't be talking about today. We won't be talking about ULA pricing. We won't be talking about ULA maximization. We might mention it a couple of times, but we won't talk about it in detail. And we won't discuss any ULA contract negotiation. So this is a completely different, that could be another 5-10 hours of conversation and live streaming, but this is only focused on the basics of the ULA. And this is what we're talking about, the Oracle ULA, the perpetual ULA, and pool of funds. So the ULA agreement, the unlimited license agreement, is the most interesting agreement in Oracle. It's the most well-used agreement. Oracle sales love it, and a lot of Oracle customers love it. So we see a lot of ULA contracts out there. It's been around for about 10 years. It's very popular, but it's also can be extremely a very good agreement if you know what you're doing, but it can also be basically a compliance rabbit hole that you're never going to find your way out of if you really get into the dark corners of the ULA. One common thing we see with a lot of the people we talk about to is that they often confuse ULAs, or they mix them up with Microsoft's EA agreements. So this is completely separate. So you need to, if you're working with Microsoft, don't apply that type of thinking into the Oracle ULA. So here are the basics of the Oracle ULA. Oracle customer signs a license agreement with Oracle. It's unlimited for a specific piece of Oracle software. It's a very customized contract, and it has a number of limitations, contractual terms and limitations that you have to be really aware of. If you're not familiar with the ULA agreement, it can be very difficult to find them and sort them out. And these are the things that very often comes to haunt you, especially if you are about to exit your ULA or move away from ULA later on. A standard ULA, between 1 and 5 years is the terms that you have to, or you can choose between. A standard ULA, the most common ULA, is 3 years. That's the term that you have the ULA for. So which product can you include? Well, you can basically include whatever product you want. The most common ULAs that we see is database ULAs. That's still the most widely used Oracle software out there. We see it often mixed up with Oracle middleware. very common component in the Oracle ULA. But basically, you can mix it up however you please. So you see Oracle ULAs with middleware, database, applications across the stack. So there's basically no limitation to what you can be or what that can be included into the ULA. So here is a simple example. So customer to Oracle is paying Oracle a 3 million license fee, upfront license fee for the ULA. So it's an upfront one-time fee that you do. In this case, 3 million. You choose the products that you want to include. As I said, most common is database products, but very often it's mixed with different types of software. But database ULAs are the most common ones. Then you negotiate for how long the term is. Is it 1 year, 2 years, all the way up to 5 years? Standard is 3 years. And when you have that ULA contract, theoretically, you can use as much as you want of the software included in the ULA. So it doesn't matter if you have 1,000 database licenses deployed or 100,000 or 1 million in theory deployed. It's an all-you-can-eat agreement, and what you eat is what you keep. So that means once you exit the ULA, there's a process for that, you keep the licenses that you are consuming. So here is a scenario where a customer to Oracle goes in, it's 2019, they sign an Oracle ULA, and then they pay an one-time upfront license fee. In this case, it's a 3-year ULA. So when 22 comes around, you have 2 options with your ULA. You can either renew the ULA, that means that you sign up with a new upfront license fee. There's new support added to that, and you have to negotiate a new term and all these things, any changes that you want to the ULA. The other option you have is that you go and exit the ULA. And that's how this exit process is. Basically, you go telling Oracle how many licenses that you're consuming. They take the unlimited license deployment right and turn it into a fixed number of perpetual licenses. And that's the exit process. That's much more going into the exit process. It's much more complicated than that. But in basic, simple terms, that is what is happening. So here we got a question, and you can reply in the chat if you already know the answer. So please, engage. That's more than welcome. So can you sign a 6-year ULA? No, in this case, it's a 5-year limit on it. That's the maximum. We don't see anything else. The most common one is 3 years, and you can have 1-year ULA and everything in between, basically. Can you mix Oracle technology, such as so database and middleware? Can you mix that with Oracle applications into the ULA? Yes, you can. You can mix just about any Oracle software into the ULA. That's absolutely possible. So I know there's a little lag on the chat, so I'm answering the questions for you in this case. If I exit my ULA, will I keep my license rights? And in this case, yes, you will keep your right to consume licenses, the licenses that you had in the ULA, but the unlimited right is going to be removed. Your licenses are going to be turned into a fixed number of perpetual licenses. So you keep what you are consuming at the end of the ULA. And that's also why the exit process is a very part of managing your ULA, because getting that right is, of course, obviously very important. This is another very common question. Will my support costs go up if I exit my ULA with, let's say, 10,000 licenses instead of the 1,000 licenses that we projected together with Oracle when we made the ULA agreement? So the support or the cost of support is going to be exactly the same whether you exit with 1,000, 10,000 or 100,000 licenses. It's not going to make any differences to the support cost. However, Oracle always apply an annual uplift to this, the cost of support. That's a standard that happens for all Oracle customers, whether they're in a ULA or in any other type of license agreement. You will see these standard support uplifts that happens every year, unless you negotiated something else. Will Oracle be upset if we exit the ULA with thousands, in this case 4,000 CPUs, instead of the 1,000 that we projected originally when we negotiated the ULA with Oracle? No, they won't be mad at you. That's, of course, the terms, that's the conditions of the whole agreement. But you need to be aware of that Oracle is, of course, they're going to try to minimize the number of licenses that you do exit with. That is really in their interest. It's their opportunity to come back and sell you even more. So they don't want you to have a big chunk of licenses that you can use forever. They want you to come back and buy more. That's the whole idea here. So what are you giving away when you get this ULA agreement? So on the surface, it sounds like a fantastic agreement. Unlimited deployment rights, it's something everybody wants. So what are you giving away in this case? Well, many Oracle customers, or all who are entering into the ULA, is giving away their right to split up support. Now, I'm moving a little bit ahead here, but it's really the trade that you're making with Oracle. So first of all, you give a lump sum of money, so your upfront license fee. So that's the trade. And then whatever you have of support of those products that are included into the ULA. So if you already an Oracle database customer and you enter into a ULA database where the ULA product is primarily database products, they're going to take all those former contracts and they're going to fuse them together into the ULA. So that is what Oracle is. That's the trade that you're making with Oracle. And we're going to see how especially the support business of Oracle is very, very important to Oracle. So here you see an example. It's a customer who already has existing contracts, database contracts. They're moving into ULA. In this case, they have 5 different contracts bought over, let's say, 10 years. In this case, that's not uncommon. Even 15, 20 years is not uncommon. Different amounts of support on each contract. Oracle is going to say, well, that's great. You're getting into this ULA. We're going to take all these contracts, which were each and every one was a separate contract that you could terminate anytime you wanted to. But we're going to take those and we're going to fuse them into the ULA. So it basically becomes one unbreakable contracts that you can't really do anything with. And why is that so difficult? Well, Oracle's support business is a great business, and they are very, very focused on protecting that business. It's what drives all the entire Oracle or corporation. It's what fuels their money spent for acquisitions and such. And Oracle protects that with a number of things. So first, they bind the contracts together, but they also have other policies such as the repricing rule. And repricing rule is basically saying that Oracle and its customers has an agreement. So when you go in and buy a ULA agreement or any agreement with Oracle, Oracle basically says, well, we're going to give you a discount on this deal. It's going to be a non-standard discount, and it's going to be based on the volume that you are buying. However, if you change the volume at a later point after the deal has been done, if you change that, make any changes to the volume, we are also going to make a change to basically the discount we gave you upfront. Now, since they can't change the discount on your upfront license cost, they can change the discount they gave you or extended to you on your support or the cost of support retroactively. So that's what they're doing. So they are basically dialing back the cost of support. So in this case, let's say that if you're looking to certify your ULA with 1,000 processors and you are paying $2 million in support for the ULA, let's say that you then 4 years later are looking to terminate basically half of that agreement. Oracle will not be quoting you $2 million divided with 2, so basically half of the support cost. They're not going to extend that to you. You're not going to go from $2 million down to $1 million in support. What they're going to do is say, well, you're making changes to your agreement, so now we're going to recalculate the cost of support as if you're buying a completely new deal. And the effect of that is that basically you end up with no lesser cost in support. So the cost of support remains the same. It's very, very difficult to make any changes or at least drastic changes to the cost of support. And Oracle knows this. This is the rules they put in place because they want to protect this support stream so very much. So what Oracle wants you to do is, first of all, this is their Jedi mind trick. They want you, first of all, pay money for the licenses. Of course, that's the upfront license fee. They don't want you to consider that you're going to be locking in your support stream. They don't want you to think about the exit process. They don't want to talk about exit process. This is going to be presented to you as something that's very easy to do. In reality, it's complicated, and it very often is a way to push customers, Oracle customers, into renewing their ULA agreements instead of exiting, renewing them at a very high cost. They want you to include as much Oracle software as possible because that ties all those support money into that one unbreakable contract. It's just very good business for Oracle, and it makes it almost unlikely that you're going to chip away any of these old licenses that you're not using anymore because they're all fused into this one unbreakable agreement. And then, of course, and this is what seems on the surface very appealing with the Oracle ULA, and it's often presented this way. They want you to believe that you don't have to worry about Oracle license management if you're in the ULA, because after all, it's unlimited. So why would you worry? And of course, the situation is it's only unlimited under certain conditions. So software asset management or license management is a very important part of having a successful ULA. So these are some of the questions you should ask yourself when you're getting into ULAs or looking to renew your ULA. Do you see a big growth in your Oracle software? So that there needs to be high growth scenarios before you can justify the cost of the ULA. What products should I include into the ULA? Keep it simple and minimal. Only include the most necessary products that you're looking. Don't get into this sales game where they are just asking you or inviting you to include as much as possible. Don't do it. It will bite you in the end. Then, of course, what in terms of SAM resources, do we have the right resources to manage this? Don't go into ULA if you don't have a program surrounding it, because it's going to be a very high cost at the end of the ULA or during the ULA if you don't get your resources right in terms of managing the ULA. You should also, of course, be thinking about all the practical stuff, all these terms and conditions that needs to be right in the ULA, especially about the legal entities that are gonna have access to the ULA under the customer definition. And I believe Fredrik is gonna talk a bit more about that. And then, of course, if you're moving into ULA and you already have a high support cost, you're going to be looking at that, and you will need to realize that it's going to be very difficult for you to make any cost-cutting, support costing activities on that support cost at a later point in your ULA life cycle. So you really need to look at this cost of support in terms of evaluating the value of the ULA. So here we have a ULA lifecycle that very much illustrate how important and why Oracle support business is so important to Oracle. The ULA here, the cycle, you can see that the support costs are painted gray. So in the red, you have the first, in 2009, you have the customer going into ULA. They already had a support stream in 2008 and the years beforehand. So they were already an existing ULA customer, and that Oracle customer, sorry. And that's a very common scenario. They enter into the ULA. What happens is they fuse all these support stream, existing support stream, the products that are going to be adding into the ULA, they fuse them together into the ULA. Then you sign the ULA, and you can see there is a big uplift in the actual cost or ongoing cost of support. In this case, it's a 3-year agreement. So in 2012, this is a very common scenario, they renew the ULA agreement. That means that there's going to be a new agreement, there's going to be a new upfront license cost with a new big chunk of support. So 22% of the upfront license costs are going to be added on top of the existing support stream. So here you can see there's a big jump at 2012 because they renew the ULA agreement. So in 2015, they do the same thing again, and again another jump. Now this you can see that the upfront license cost at 2015 is not as high as the previous year. So they maybe have been a bit better to negotiate the cost of the agreement. Doesn't really matter because there's still a good jump to the cost of support. And again, you see them renew yet another time in 2000 or exit in 2018. Renew the ULA in 2018. However, what you see here is that the upfront license cost is really not what really drives that's not really where the chunk of money for Oracle lies. It's on the ongoing support, and it's gonna be a revenue stream that's gonna keep paying to Oracle because you as a customer to Oracle can't get out of it. So in this case, in this example, license fees are only just about $12 million euros in this case, but the combined support is over 33, almost 34 million euros. So that is really where all the money lies, and that is the reason why Oracle is spending so much time making sure, first of all, that you stay in support and that you're going to keep renewing the ULA. And they have a team for that. They're very good at keeping customers renewing the ULA. So we talked about Oracle, that the ULA agreement is indeed a very good agreement. And these are some of the scenarios where Oracle ULAs are a good alternative. So first of all, you don't have any large Oracle support contracts so basically you are a clean sheet customer to Oracle, you're entering into the ULA. That is a good startup. You see growth on specific Oracle software. So if there's a high growth scenario, the ULA is an excellent agreement, or can very much be an excellent agreement. And then, of course, you have the necessary software asset management processes that you need to go into such an agreement, and that. It's one of the things that we recommend, that already at the signing process, that when you have the team in place, you're discussing entering into the ULA. Already there, you're looking at managing the ULA is an additional cost, and you would basically apply that into the overall cost of having the ULA. So here are some of the scenarios where you should not sign a ULA. So in cases that the ULA contract are restrictive, especially around merger and acquisitions, if you're very active in that area, you really have to be on the lookout. It can become very, very costly for you. Unfortunately, we see quite a lot of customers to Oracle that goes in and sign ULAs at the end of the audit or an audit. That is really not the time to get into ULA. Oracle loves to put it in front of their customers, especially at the end of an audit. There is a reason for that, and it doesn't serve you any good in most cases. So be really on your toes, be on your guard if that is being proposed to you at the end of the ULA. Often it's customers, they think it's a get out of jail free card to some extent, but it's not. It's going to come back to haunt you. Companies that doesn't have much knowledge or not spending the necessary resources on the license management aspect of running the ULA, those type of companies are going to be ending up renewing the ULA many times over, and that's going to be costly. And then, of course, if you have a lot of legacy agreements with a lot of legacy support, don't get into a ULA contract. It's going to be very expensive for you. Or at least be on the lookout and be aware of this. Considerations. So there's no true ups at the end of the ULA, and that's what we talked about. Doesn't matter if you exit with 1,000 or 1 million licenses, you're going to be paying the same in support. However, as it goes with ULA, the unlimited part is only, you have to negotiate it. It's only as good as what you are able to negotiate and pay for. So here is one of the questions. So what is the trade you make with Oracle by signing a ULA? And we talked about this. It's really at the core of the Oracle ULA. It's the core of the Oracle business. You give your right to reduce your Oracle support fees. It's very, very difficult to do that when you are in the ULA and after you exit the ULA. What if I exit my ULA and I want to reduce support? How can I do that? Well, of course, there are things you can do in any given circumstances. So when we talk about that, it's almost impossible. It's because that the practical result is that it's very, very, very difficult for most companies to do anything about this. However, there are things that you can do. You can try to assign licenses to divested entities, but most often Oracle won't approve it, and you're going to find it a very difficult process to do. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's doubtful. But there are tools that you can use. You can also go to third-party support. That's a real tool. That's a real opportunity for many Oracle customers. Go to third-party support, or at least get an understanding what is the value of that. And then after some time, if you will, or if you want to consider that, you could actually go back and negotiate a new support agreement or get back on Oracle support after a few years out of Oracle support. Now, Oracle, of course, is a commercial company like everybody else. They don't want to see you leave. They're going to make a fuss about it, but they definitely want to see you back. So they, in many cases, they're going to be ready to do a deal with you. Don't say no to money. My Oracle lacks Oracle licensing knowledge, but we signed a ULA to warrant an audit. Is that a good or bad idea? No, it's really a bad idea, and it's typically very poor ULAs that you get into. So avoid those types of scenario. You're gonna end up paying when you are exiting your ULA or when you're trying to leave that very same ULA. Many cases, you don't even get the right style of ULA that is really covering all your compliance needs at the end of the audit. You can very easily get into a heap of trouble getting into that ULA. It's not going to solve your issues. It's just going to push it. It's like kicking the can down the road in many cases. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about managing your ULA before I'm going to hand it over to Frederick. We're going to have a break first. So, managing the ULA is super important. And when we are dealing with ULA clients, we definitely know the difference in terms of attitude and in terms of understanding the ULA. So, have a project team. You need to have the internal resources. In most cases, it's also good to have external resources included into that mix, because that's the people who's going to sort of pressure test if all we are running around doing inside our company, is it really any good? And many cases, there are things you are leaving out for whatever reason. So that's a good way to think about these things. It's always good to get a fresh pair of eyes on the things that you're doing, your assumptions, the way you are dealing with Oracle and your ULA overall. Have meetings or regular meetings in terms of understanding how are you deploying, track your deployments, have an understanding of what is the actual situation. So depending on your company and your Oracle environments, that can be every half year, it may be every 8 months, it might be every quarter if you're in a very, very dynamic period. And then, of course, you should have the ability to review deployment numbers and check installations down at a detail level. And that, of course, is to keep your deployment numbers in check and understand what are you actually using, what type of Oracle software are you consuming. And the case with Oracle software is always that it's very easy to get into all kinds of other products that is not included in the ULA. And that's a very common compliance problem with Oracle. And we see them again and again, especially with ULAs, because after all, they are unlimited license agreement, and unlimited for a lot of people apparently means that you can download and deploy anything. That's not what it means. And then, of course, you have the time to review your territory, any merger acquisition, any changes to your customer definition, any type of development that can have an effect on you. That could be any transformations to new environments, use of new virtualization technologies and such. Anything that could be important from an ULA Oracle license management point of view. Continuing in terms of managing ULA, make sure that you have the right terms when you are negotiating. If you don't have that, you're going to be forced into a renewal. Oracle is very, very good at picking up these common mistakes, these common areas where customers to Oracle get it wrong. They are very good at picking it out. And when they pick it out, it always ends up with you renewing the ULA. Make sure that you are deploying in the right places. It's with the worst ULAs are the ones where you thought there was at the get-go, you thought there was a lot of need, and then you end up with almost no deployments. Very expensive, almost no licenses, very little value. And then, of course, and this is something we've been talking about quite a bit on this channel and in overall in our training, make sure that you're running scripts. This is the way that Oracle is themselves are checking what are you actually consuming. So you need to be running scripts to get a good understanding of what are you doing. And that needs to happen a couple of times while in the ULA, but also at the end of the ULA when you're about to exit, for a number of reasons. First of all, you need to make sure that you, of course, are compliant, but you also need to understand what are the number of licenses that you're going to be exiting with, and what can you do to maximize that. So here we have different ULA review start dates. I'm not going to go into the details on that. We're going to share these slides in the event channel on LinkedIn, so you're going to have access to them there. But this just shows you that it does take time to prepare ULA reviews. And the more time you have, the more time you, of course, have to make changes and understand how you're going to deal with any things that might pop up that you didn't know about, that you have to somehow react to and circumvent or deal with in one way or another. So understanding that is really important, and also understanding that it takes time to get a lot of people, because ULAs typically affects a lot of people across the organization. These people need to come together and have a shared understanding of what are the next actions, what do we need to do in order to either renew the ULA or exit the ULA or whatever we're going to do with the ULA. That making that sound judgment takes time, and the more time you have, the better. That doesn't mean that it's not valuable if you are at the very end of the ULA, just a few months before you're about to do either exit or renew ULA. It's still valuable to do this exercise. However, it is, of course, much more pressure and prone to possible mistakes when you have not that much time. So here it's about managing merger and acquisitions within a ULA, and we're just going to briefly talk about it because this is a common problem. So acquiring a new entity if you are in a ULA. So what you should do is, of course, always go to the contract, go in, read your contract. What are the limitations? Often, or a standard clause in the ULA is that there is a cap on the acquisitions that you can do. So if it's below 10% of either your revenue or the number of employees, different metrics, different situations, then you can include that acquisition with no additional cost. However, if it's above, then you would need to go and negotiate with Oracle. If your company is merging with a larger new company, well, then you probably need to negotiate new contracts for that new entity. If our company is being acquired by another company and we have ULA, will be an exit or certification process in place, and that will start immediately, or should start immediately, as a part of that activity. If you have an active ULA and you divest the company, can be assigned unlimited licenses to that entity, and that is something that would require negotiations with Oracle unless you have a specific contract clause that states exactly what you can do. But this is something you, per standard, would need to negotiate with Oracle. Yeah. I think we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we are going to hand it over to Fredrik.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I think if you can mute yourself, I think there's an echo here.
Yeah.
So we will start in 47. So the hour mark and the minute 47. So there was a question here. Hi, Kobe. What about joint ventures? You need to negotiate with Oracle customer definition that includes joint ventures. Oracle might approve it, but you have to list every entity. For example, if you have a new joint venture and you have an existing ULA, you need to negotiate with Oracle because that joint venture is not part of your contract and you need to go to Oracle. Hello, Castor. What is immediately 1 month to 3 months? I think you're talking about when is the certification process starting in, if you're acquired as a company and you have a ULA. It depends on your account team. If you have an account team that's not paying attention, it might be several months. Oracle does not have an old notification process where this company has been acquired, they have a ULA, now we're going to start it. They don't have that. So it's really in a flux. If you're lucky, they might not contact you for several months. Hello, Super. Hope I pronounced your name correctly. Where can I find the PowerPoint for the 2 previous sessions? And of course, this one. You should be visiting the LinkedIn event group. If I can share my link to that. You should see the link. I recommend you go to this and press attend. We try to communicate with you that way. I think it's a smart way. If I did share a link here in the chat. Here is a real ULA that we will together review. So I think if you can just take up this link, because you might think that, oh, the presentation, we have copies of the contract in the presentation, but it might be too small. And for me, I always think it's easier to learn if I can see things for myself. And it should be, if I can repost it. That's the link. So you should see it on the chat on the right-hand side. Okay, we're going to start. Otherwise, I'm going to take some of your time. You can go to the link, or you can watch on the PowerPoint here. This is a publicly available ULA contract, and we might be repeating ourselves a little bit. Sorry about that. But the ULA contract is essentially what Martin talked about. You pay Oracle a one-time license fee. That's a one-time. The ULA can be anything from 1 to 5 years. It can even be perpetual, so it never expires. That's the perpetual ULA. You negotiate the license fees. You negotiate how long the ULA should be. You negotiate what products are part of the ULA. Everything is negotiated. We will talk about the ULA pricing in session 8, which is Oracle contract negotiation. If you want to know how Oracle is pricing their ULAs, I suggest that you attend session number 8. If we take a look at this ULA contract, well, it's the Oracle ordering document. As you remember, Oracle calls their licensing agreements ordering documents. And at the top, you can see State of Montana. You can see here what are the products part of the ULA. They did one good thing. They only have unlimited contracts, unlimited deployments, because sometimes you might include, you might sign an ordering document and it's unlimited for some products, and then it's fixed quantities for other products. I don't like that. If you're buying fixed products, try to buy that from a separate agreement, because you don't want to lock in too many products into the same CSI, so that you have the flexibility in the future to terminate those licenses and support. Because everything that's part of one contract would be the same CSI, and you're locked by the repricing rules. You can see here how much they paid. It's $1.5 million. If you actually Google, which I was, when Morten was presenting, I was actually Googling this because I found the contract, and you can see that State of Montana legislative had a session, and they're actually saying why they signed ULA, and they're saying they signed the ULA because they were audited by Oracle. So this ULA contract was signed because they were audited by Oracle, and you can see in this document, it also says they signed it because one of the items was virtualization, so they've been most likely deploying Oracle on virtual machines. That happens quite often. But that said, I actually think that they got a good price for the ULA if it's audited. Often, if you're being audited by Oracle, the ULA contracts are quite expensive, and there's a big difference in pricing. I often say the best ULAs are $1 to $3 million. If you're paying more than that, I think there's much to do in the negotiation area. But some companies are paying 10, 20, 30 million for their ULAs. But we will talk about that in session 8. And you can see here the net technical support. So that is how much they paid in support. It's both old and new. Backdated means that they just had some unpaid support renewals that they needed to pay. Agreement, what are they referencing? They're referencing an older OMA. Customer definition, it's the most important contract item on the ULA. It is who can access and use the Oracle software. We're not going to go into details here, but it says customer definition, and this is not a normal customer definition. This is highly negotiated. It's including contractors and a few other items. Normally, and the ULA is, you have a ULA and then you just list the legal entities that are part of the ULA. So this is quite uncommon. And then we have the territory, which is deployment rights, US only. technical support, very important to negotiate, because remember the technical support increased by 4% year on year. But if you negotiate a 0% increase, you actually save some money on that. And it's quite easy to negotiate from Oracle. The reason why it's easy is because the person that you're negotiating with for the ULA, they are not compensated on second or third year support. So they are happy to give you that contract item because it doesn't really impact their sales compensation. They had approximately 1.3 million in existing support rolled into the ULA. Here they are listing all of these different support agreements. And you can see here's this contract support number. So here's the CSI numbers. Well, invoice number, I'm not quite sure why that is relevant. And how much you're paying per contract. Before they sign this contract, they have the right to terminate one contract at a time. If they were decreasing Oracle, they could terminate the licenses and support and save money. They have given that away. As Morten showed in the Unbreakable picture, it's become a one contract. The only way they can really reduce their support fees would be, as someone was saying earlier, that you would go to a third-party support provider like Spinnaker, for example, and that you stop paying maintenance together on the whole contract and just buy the support from a third party. Total support stream is that all these support contracts are being replaced with one new ULA support stream. This is it. So both me and Morten worked at Oracle, and this is actually when we wanted to offer customers ULAs. This is the thing that Oracle internally is asking: how much is their existing support? Because the more existing support a company have, the more Oracle wants to offer a ULA to that customer, just because they're locking in the support stream. I think right now Oracle support maintenance is 70% of their annual revenue. Essentially, Oracle is a large maintenance company. And if Oracle would change their support policies, I think that 30% of that revenue would disappear over the next 12 months. Order of precedence, remember, it's the Oracle ordering document that controls the license terms. It's not the Oracle master agreement. Then you can see that under unlimited deployment right, which is the interesting part, it is a 3-year ULA, and they have negotiated some non-standard clause as well. I'm struggling to understand, but sometimes only whoever was negotiating that knows why that is important. Sometimes contractual text means nothing if you're not read into the details. Under the undeployment right, you can find certification process. And certification process is really, how do you exit? And they have a non-standard certification process clause, which means that they have to provide much more details than a normal ULA customer would if they want to exit their ULA. Breach of unlimited deployment terms means that when can Oracle say that you're breaching your ULA term and can cancel your agreement? The number one is if you would not pay your annual support. Oracle have the right to terminate and will probably terminate your unlimited contract, and then you might have 0 licenses. And this is if you ever want to start saving money by going to third-party support, or for example, you need to exit your unlimited phase and go into a fixed quantity contract, which happens after you exit your ULA. And Yeah, it's. I would think that they're talking about. They're very worried. They have a text here saying that the that after you exit your ULA, there's no true up for your licenses, and essentially, or sorry, no true up for your support. And for me, me who know how Oracle ULA works, I would not recommend that any customer needs this text, but it was obvious that this customer was worried, will our maintenance increase if we exit our ULA with 1,000 CPUs? And for anyone who's paid attention today, no, your maintenance will not increase. It will just increase by this annual support uplift. But this state of Montana, they were worried about that, so they asked Oracle to include a text describing that. Something else, they also requested a 1-year no audit clause. They were obviously, as I found out today, they were audited by Oracle in 2016 when they signed the ULA. So, and they were obviously thinking that Oracle might audit them again. I have never heard about Oracle auditing any ULA customer, ever. I'm not saying it has never happened, but it's very unlikely. I would say this clause here, basically pointless. If it would have a value if it would be a no audit clause 1 year after your ULA ends, because that's when Oracle wants to audit you. And this customer is probably not aware that Oracle will essentially audit you once you want to exit the Oracle ULA. That said, it's 2016. It was signed. The ULA was 3 years, and it's 2021 now. I don't think this state of Montana actually managed to exit their ULA. I'm just speculating, but it could be 80-90% certainty that they were probably forced to renew the ULA because Oracle would find that they were non-compliant at the end of the ULA. But who knows, they might exit. Here is the appendix which I talked about, which are the legal entities that can use and access the Oracle ULA software. And so if you're about to sign a ULA, make sure that you include all the legal entities on this list. I think there was Kobe asked as well. Joint ventures, if there's any minority-owned companies, you might be able to include them as well. If you're about to exit your ULA, you should be looking at this appendix with the legal entities. Have we acquired companies before or during the ULA? And then can we add them to the list of legal entities before we exit our Oracle ULA? What did State of Montana trade away for the ULA? So they trade away the right to reduce Oracle support without repricing. That is because the unlimited agreement is a fantastic agreement, and it would be too good to be true if there was not a catch, and this is the catch. And unfortunately, there's way too many companies who sign ULAs and without knowing that they're giving away this right to terminate support going forward. This is, if you are considering a ULA, or this is essentially the biggest decision you have to make. If the ULA, the deployment of Oracle software, virtualized environment, is that worth it compared to giving away the right to be able to reduce Oracle support fees? What did we learn about the certification process? As I mentioned, they need to provide way more information than normal ULA customers would. This is why it's important, if you are a ULA customer, or maybe you're a consultant or have a ULA contract, the first thing you want to know before you start making a strategy on how to exit ULA, you need to review the ULA contract. What does it say? First off, do you have all the legal entities? Is there any other non-standard text in your contract? What do you need to do in order to exit? Do you need to work with Oracle LMS? Is it signing a one piece of paper with the quantities? Is it the detailed deployment information like this state of Montana did? You can have a look at the link. As I mentioned before, you can also, if you have a ULA contract, it's good to look at these other ULA contracts and compare to your own, because then you can make an assessment. Okay, what is different with that ULA and my ULA? There's a question here. This is a server middleware. What about desktop apps like Primavera and Big Scare, Java? You can sign a ULA for Java, but that would be a subscription. And that means that you pay Oracle money for the ULA. It sort of works the same way, but the only difference is that when your Java ULA ends, you don't own any licenses because it's a subscription. So you're basically forced to renew all the time. I think the Java ULA could only be good if you are sort of have a lot of Oracle Java installed, you need it, and you just want to buy some time, then you could sign a ULA for Java. But remember, when your ULA for Java ends, you don't own anything. I've not seen any ULA for cloud yet. Primavera, you can sign a ULA for. You can sign a ULA for Oracle applications as well. Oracle eBusiness Suite, Oracle JD Edwards. You can sign a ULA for most Oracle products. Cast again. So the list of legal entities can be updated during the term of, yes, it can be updated because there's a contract term in your ULA. If you don't have it, you should request it. I think it's standard. It's where Oracle allows you to add new legal entities to the ULA contract, and you have two different models to choose from. Number one model is you can add legal entities only to the size maximum of 10% of your company revenue or employees. You have to choose one of them. So you have before you sign the ULA contract, okay, which model is appropriate for you? Should you allow companies to be added to the ULA based maximum 10% of your revenue or 10% of your employees? And that can be then, that's just an administrative process to add the legal entities. If you add a legal entity that is 20 or 30% of your company, then you need to have a discussion or a negotiation with Oracle to see if you're able to add them to the ULA contract. How to renew? I thought this could be a good way. At least this used to be a mind map. This is how we started, and then we thought, like other people said, it's a good way of explaining. We've talked about reviewing the licensing agreement, and that's where we recommend that you start. Look at what products are part of the ULA, because the products will determine, okay, is this applications or is it technology, middleware? You want to know, how can I measure these products? Is it scripts? Is it the tooling? What is it? And if you have some knowledge about Oracle as well, if it's Oracle database, for example, okay, then you know that they might have used database options that are not part of the ULA. That's quite common. The most common products that we see, if you have a ULA for database and you don't have advanced compression, I think it's 90% certainty that you have used advanced compression, and you might have a problem with your ULA. And then you look at what are the contract limitations, if any. Also understand what's the exit process. Which legal entities, because it could be that whoever signed the ULA, which is quite common, that they did not have the necessary knowledge and expertise on how to build the ULA contract when they signed it. So it could be that the legal entities have been wrong from day one. Or it could be that your territory rights are wrong from day one. It could be just a single country and you have users and companies all across the world. How do you have the right to deploy in Amazon and count those numbers to your exit numbers? That's going to tell you from just looking at the contract. And then obviously you need to validate that with, okay, which are the legal entities? Where have you deployed it? Have we deployed it in public cloud? That's the first part. Then you start with the inventory. Where do you have Oracle installed? Usually the most difficult part for many companies. I recommend that you use a combination of existing inventory tools, software asset management tools, and because they will tell you where do you have Oracle software installed. And I think we mentioned this before, but the SAM tools are great, and I actually think they're really, really good at telling you where do you have Oracle installed. They are not perfect when it comes to actually understanding what are the licenses required on that particular server. That is why we recommend that you use these Oracle LMS scripts or another firm that have developed these firms scripts, or even ask to get the scripts from Oracle, then have someone to help you analyze them. Some products, there's no script, there's no tool, it's simply manual counting or review to understand what is the licenses required. You will then have a licensing position based on that. Normally this process, well, we often say that if we would get all the data on one day, it would take approximately 4 to 6 weeks to have a licensing position. And with this licensing position, it will tell you how much do you have of your Oracle ULA software installed, what's the quantities. And that is here, right? So we go here. If we have a database enterprise edition, we have diagnostic and tuning, for example, and we have a ULA product. Those are the products you want to deploy more of before the ULA ends. Because remember, there will not be prorated support cost when the ULA ends. So you should be deploying as much as possible. And that is using VMware, that is using, for example, powerful servers, IBM machines, don't cap LBARs, and lots of CPUs on them. And Martin talked briefly about that. It's important to not do this the last month before your ULA ends. Because if your ULA ends, this is all you're going to get, a licensing position, and then you need to submit the papers to Oracle. But if you do this and you have at least 2-3 months before your ULA ends, you can actually maximize your current ULA. And why do you want to maximize it? Well, there's first off, if you maximize it, you will make sure that you save money and don't have to buy the same licenses again in the future. You can create a license buffer. So you try to blow up the numbers as much as possible for the time when your ULA is about to end. And once Oracle has accepted your numbers, you can then consolidate and optimize and shrink your Oracle environments. So, for example, if you exit your ULA with 2,000 processor licenses of software, you can easily just consolidate it down to maybe 1,000, and then you have 1,000 licenses buffered. And having that buffered, when you're telling Oracle, either I'm exiting or I'm renewing, if you're renewing, it means that you don't need to accept Oracle software. You can really push back and say, this is not really value for us, or you don't need to be fearful of your license position, which are often many companies are. And when they're thinking, oh, if I exit my ULA, am I really compliant? What will happen? Will Oracle audit me? Well, don't worry. You have actually deployed thousands of CPUs here. The second one is, if you go back to the licensing position, that is the non-ULA software. That's the product that you have deployed that you didn't know you had. Or they might have been deployed from day one, because whoever signed the first ULA contract, many times they don't know what they have already installed. But it can also be a product that you have deployed during the ULA that you didn't know that you had installed. And that's where you start thinking about, okay, we have found that WebLogic Suite is installed on a very powerful server. you might want to move that to a smaller server that doesn't require that many licenses. If you deployed non-ULA software on virtualized environments, if it's VMware or Hyper-V or anything else, you want to maybe remove that and put that on a physical server. And what you're going to end up with then is some things you might not need to buy, and then you're saving cost avoidance. But other things you need to buy, then you can go to Oracle and either include them in a new ULA. You don't tell Oracle why you need this new ULA with this new product. You just say, we have a future need for this product. And why can this be good? That is because if Oracle would do an audit of your environment and they find that you are $20 million out of compliant with your ULA, the new ULA offer that they're giving you will then be based on or built on your non-compliance findings. So you might not be $20 million, but it might be $10 million. But if you go and tell Oracle, we would like to include this new product in a new ULA, you might pay as little as $1 or $2 million, because Oracle does not know that you want this because you're out of compliant with your ULA. And that's the real, that there is no price list for Oracle ULA, that the ULA is really based on business value. And for example, you can also have an alternative to purchase. You might want to exit your ULA, but you have these products from Oracle that you actually need. Then you can go and buy them from Oracle on a volume agreement. So what Oracle wants you to do, and this is the Jedi mind trick, they want you to renew the Oracle ULA, obviously. Most likely. I hope it's changing a little bit now, where some account managers at Oracle are compensated on cloud, and then they're basically telling the customers, please exit the ULA so I can sell you a cloud, which for me is not really that good, but because maybe it's in the customer interest to renew the ULA. They often want you to only work with LMS or GLS or SIA and not anybody else. And why, if I ask you, like, why don't you want to work with LMS and SIA to count your environment? If you work with LMS and SIA and they find that you're non-compliant here, that's what you have to pay for. You don't. You have to purchase a new ULA or license it for a large amount of money. That is why you want to do this activity by yourself. They also are pushing often for perpetual ULA, and that I used to be a bit skeptic towards the perpetual ULA, but it can be a good agreement sometimes. I'm going to talk about that a bit later. They wanted to give me information about the current ULA deployment before you renew or exit. I'll tell you in what documents. But also Oracle wants to make you believe that, for example, most companies have only signed one ULA contract in their life. Many IT procurement people have only signed one ULA or maybe never. And Oracle often gives you only the contractual options that they want to sell to maximize Oracle revenue. For example, if you've signed 3-year ULAs, Oracle might just say, no, you can only sign a 3-year ULA. But if you attend this training, you will know that you can actually sign a 1-year ULA, 2-year ULA, 3-year ULA, 4-year ULA, 5-year ULA. I've seen a 6-month ULA. So I think it's important to understand that whatever your account manager is telling you, often or almost always, they're just sharing with you the contractual options that they want you to sign. And what you need to do is to have this knowledge and say, no, but I know I can get that 1-year ULA, and that's the only thing I want. And then they're going to sort of often back off and give you a 1-year ULA contract offer. So what are the questions you should ask yourself when you're coming to the end of your ULA? Are we compliant with our ULA? I would say 9 out of 10 companies are not compliant with their ULA, maybe even more. I would start the assumption that you're not compliant with your ULA. If it turns out that you are compliant, you're 1 in 100 that are compliant with your ULA. Also, should you change the products in your ULA? You can take out products, you can put new products into your ULA. It doesn't have to be the same products the same time every year. Ask your IT what do they tell you about your growth and deployment. You don't want to be in a position where you're ending your ULA and then 6 months later you are doing a hardware refresh. Try to speak to your IT department before to understand what is the life cycle for our Oracle-based environments. If you do that in a good, if you start doing this 12 months ahead, maybe you can actually impact so that this hardware refresh is done before the ULA ends. Can you exit your ULA instead of renewing? But also, if you're looking at the renewal, a good opportunity is to review the contract. If you find that you might have forgotten a legal entity, that you don't have the territory rights, or you might have an issue that you can't count cloud deployments to your ULA, when you're negotiating a renewal, you can fix all of these issues because you have the opportunity to renegotiate the whole ULA contract. If you don't, for example, it might be almost impossible to exit your Oracle ULA if you've deployed and you're using Oracle software outside of your deployment rights, or that you have legal entities that are not covered. Because then in 3 years, when you're about to exit your ULA, you have a contractual compliance issue. How to exit? This is an average number, 6-month process, and usually this will start as soon as Oracle as soon as you tell Oracle that you want to exit. Oracle LMS will give you different documentation to complete. It is up to you to decide if you want to cooperate with Oracle. I would encourage you to look at the certification clause to understand how much do you need to cooperate with Oracle. They often want to help make a exit project with you, which is essentially you should agree with the timeline for when you should submit information to Oracle. I would consider you to, if you even want to do that with them, because in your ULA exit clause, it says when you should submit the information to Oracle. Often it says 30 days after your ULA ends, you're supposed to be submitting information to Oracle, and that's stick with the contract. And Oracle will want to run their scripts as soon as possible because they want to validate your deployments. If Oracle accepts your numbers, it could be 3 months after, could be 1 year after. Longest I've heard is 2 years. Your ULA will be transformed into fixed quantities based on your exit numbers. Again, support will remain the same. It's only the annual uplift. What this means is that you should be deploying as much as possible during the ULA, but it must be done in a controlled way. This is, well, they have updated us slightly since then, but it's still very accurate. They will provide you with an Excel sheet which is called Global Deployment Report that your Oracle asks you to complete. And you're supposed to be filling in the products that you have deployed. It has actually happened a few times where companies have filled in products here that was not part of the ULA. And obviously that was not a good thing. So here you can see the metric, which is processor, and then how many of the products that you have deployed. There's also much more information that Oracle is asking for. It's asking for the legal entities that are using the Oracle products, the location where you have the Oracle products installed and running, the products, product edition, license metric, physical machine name, instance name, server make and model, processor model and speed, physical CPUs, cores, virtual machines. In the latest documentation, they are also asking much more information about your virtual environments. So you can see that it's quite a lot of information to complete, and it's easy to go wrong. And there was someone asking, how long does the ULA take? And I would say, if you would submit inconsistent information to Oracle, it might take a very long time. But if you submit it and it looks professionally made, it might be very easy to exit your ULA. So they want you to provide information on legal entities, deployments, because they are reviewing the contract. They want you to complete this, the GDR. I'm not quite sure you should complete it. Read your contract is my recommendation, and then make up your mind. Run their audit tools. I would encourage you again, read the contract. How does it say that you need to cooperate with Oracle? And they want you to exit the ULA with as little software as possible, which is strange, but that is essentially Oracle's view. And they want you to renew a ULA at a higher price. And we often see that if you have renewed your ULA, many times it costs much more than the first ULA. Again, what does your contract say? Do you need to run Oracle scripts? What is my licensing position? Do you need to do everything Oracle wants about the timelines or submitting data? All of these things you will be able to answer if you read your contracts. We're going to talk about a few the most common reasons, and it's very high level. So it's each category is covering different reasons why you can be forced to renew your ULA against your will. Number one, that you have deployed Oracle software that are not part of your ULA. Very common. And you can easily see the pricing here. 240 processors, which is $11,500 each. It's 2.7 million. You can see how easily it is for Oracle to build up a renewal offer for you. How can you prevent this? You can inform your DBAs and architects which products are part of the ULA. It could be maybe having a training session with your DBAs or an architect or anyone who's working with Oracle to inform them, this is the ULA, these are products that we have, these are products we don't have. And I think by just doing this training session will allow you to save money and time. Again, you need to make sure it's a ULA, but if you do not manage it, you're doing Oracle a favor. And either you have the ability in-house to analyze the script or work with someone who can analyze them, especially when you want to exit. And then thirdly, have an inventory discovery tool that are covering your environments. And I think there's a lot of software asset management people here. If you don't have the right inventory discovery, the data that you're analyzing is only as good as the data that's part of the set. Contractual compliance. You might sign a contract in the US. Territory class deployments can only be made in the US. But during the exit process, they find that you have deployed in Brazil. And if that would be 100 processors of Database Enterprise Edition, it's $4.7 million. Quite expensive, and these numbers are usually much higher than this. I think the general, when we help companies with ULAs, I think it's not uncommon that it comes sometimes some $200-300 million in out of compliance with the ULAs. It's not uncommon. What can you do about it? Make sure that you have worldwide usage deployment rights in your ULA contract. If you do not have that, if you're looking at your ULA and you know that you've deployed in other countries and you're using it there, and what you can then decide, maybe you want to negotiate an amendment with Oracle. Maybe not renew the whole agreement, but you just want to negotiate an amendment and changing the territory clause to make sure that you're compliant. You might have, you will have to pay for that in some way, but it can be cheaper than signing a full new ULA. Free. We talked about the customer definition, and for example, if you have a ULA and you're using ULA software for legal entities that are not part of the ULA, it's the same thing with the territory, that you're contractually out of compliance with your ULA. And Oracle is really paying attention to this when it comes to Oracle ULAs, and even for their volume purchase when they're auditing customers. What can you do about it? Make sure that you negotiate the customer definition and subsidiaries correctly, obviously. If you make acquisitions, negotiate the merger and acquisition clause so you can allow them to be included. If you make any large acquisition or merger, you might have to negotiate a whole new amendment to include that company, and then you have to pay money to Oracle. You cannot go to Oracle and say, I mistakenly negotiated our customer definition or our legal entities. They're not going to be able to, even if your account manager wanted to allow you to include them for free, they will not be able to. You have to pay money to Oracle. 4, it's becoming more and more common actually, is that an Oracle ULA contract, while you're in the ULA, you're allowed to deploy Oracle in public cloud. So you can deploy Oracle in AWS or Azure, for example. But once your ULA ends, if the ULA if we all here would have a ULA contract and that is ending on today, 25th of March, and we have 50% of our deployment in AWS, those 50% of deployments, we would not have those licenses when we're sending our certification paper to Oracle, because we cannot count the deployment in third-party cloud towards the exit numbers. So to repeat that again, during the ULA, we can deploy in AWS and Azure, but when the ULA ends, we cannot include them to the exit numbers. If we do, Oracle will come back, well, this is not allowed. So this is actually contractual, that you cannot count third-party public cloud in your exit numbers. So it's not a policy, but it is in your ULA contract. What can you do about it? You can negotiate so that you have the rights to certify deployments in third-party cloud. And this should be done before. You can also try to negotiate an amendment. If you're in the middle of your ULA right now and you discover that you have this issue, you can go to Oracle and say, we want to change our certification clause so we cannot count public cloud. You have to pay some money to Oracle. Or make sure that you don't deploy in third-party cloud. Something to be aware of this, since some months back, Oracle have changed this. They are now giving companies the right in standard ULA contracts to include deployments in third-party cloud when you want to exit. Older agreements did not have it, most likely. But new agreements from Oracle ULA contracts, there's a standard clause allowing you to count deployment in third-party cloud when you want to exit. Oracle is saying that they will ask you for the last year of your ULA, you need to give them an average vCPU that has been running on that has been using Oracle software, and that average CPU will be the licenses that you will get when you want to exit. I think it's a good thing that Oracle is has made this change. We have three myths to bust here. There's no true up at the end of the Oracle ULA. I just want to, I know this Oracle ULA concept is a bit unique, so I'm repeating that a few times. But you can deploy 10,000 of Oracle CPUs, and the support will be the same when you want to exit your ULA. Oracle will not be upset if you deploy massive numbers of licenses. They might just try to keep the numbers down, but that's because of an internal process at Oracle. But your account team will not be upset if you deploy thousands. And then you will keep the licenses if you exit your ULA, because we work with Oracle ULAs and contracts often, and I lost count over how many companies have told me, if I exit my ULA, will I keep my licenses? Yes, you will. So there's many out there who think that you don't keep your licenses if you exit your ULA. Two actions every company should take when renewing or exiting their ULA contract. Review the contract to understand if there's any issues before Oracle gets information about your deployments. And then, obviously, run the Oracle-style audit script to determine your licensing position. Don't let Oracle do that, because if you just run the Oracle script and hand them over to Oracle, they're going to control all the power, and they might come back with a nightmare of a proposal to solve any other compliance. Perpetual ULA came to the market 4 or 5 years ago. The only difference between a perpetual ULA and those normal ULAs is that perpetual ULA does never expire. It's a forever agreement. What we typically see is the companies being offered a perpetual ULA or a normal ULA if they want at the end. If you have a ULA now, Oracle's can offer you a perpetual ULA or a normal ULA. Sometimes we actually see now that Oracle is not offering a ULA renewal anymore. They just want them to go to cloud. And yeah, sometimes it might be good, but I think Oracle have a habit of just offering their customers what is in Oracle's interest and not what's in the customer's best interest. Sometimes it's not offered as a first-time agreement. I have not seen anyone being offered perpetual ULA before they've had a normal ULA. It's always been offered, at least in my experience, as sort of a renewal agreement, or it's not been, companies have had a ULA first. And as I said, it never expires. It's a forever ULA. What's traps? What's the thing to watch out for? If you sign a ULA, or sorry, perpetual ULA, what if you want to include new products? There's no price list that I've seen where Oracle is saying, if you sign a ULA for WebLogic, how can you include additional products, for example, in the perpetual ULA? So you could end up in a poor negotiation position with Oracle. We would love to see that Oracle had, okay, you sign a perpetual ULA and then you have a fixed price to include new products in your perpetual ULA. There's no such thing. What if you want to exit your ULA? I think forever is if it never expires, and it's going to increase by 4% year on year. What if you stop using Oracle, or if your Oracle dependency is decreasing? It's a long ULA. It's a long contract. The biggest trap is that Oracle wants to include non-Pula products into your total support stream. So it meaning that you sign a perpetual ULA for example, the products you want. ULA database, or maybe some options, and you think, okay, this is what I want a perpetual ULA for. But then Oracle is smart to link other contracts that you have with Oracle in this contract, and basically preventing you from terminating other non-perpetual ULA contracts. You need to be very careful about that if you encounter that, because the perpetual ULA should only be for the perpetual ULA products. but Oracle have sometimes linked non-ULA contract into that contract, so it becomes the same support stream, preventing you from terminating support. How do you exit perpetual ULA? Well, you can exit if you breach. So if you fail to pay maintenance, but obviously then you risk of Oracle canceling the contract and you don't have any licenses at all. It will happen if you're acquired by a company. If you have a perpetual ULA and you're acquired by a company, you will then be start an exit process, or it should be at least. But you should, my best advice, if you go into a perpetual ULA, negotiate a self-exit clause so you can decide when you want to exit your perpetual ULA. You don't want to be like, okay, I'm stuck in my contract forever. Or if you don't have a self-exit clause and you want to exit, you would have to go to Oracle, and then maybe you have to pay some money to be able to exit. Include a self-exit clause in your perpetual ULA. And then basically the process for exiting a perpetual ULA would be the same as exiting a normal ULA. I've never seen anyone exit a perpetual ULA. When should you consider a perpetual ULA? When you want a very long ULA. If you're looking for more than 3 years, why not look for a perpetual ULA? You should only include your core products. It should not be niche products. It's the same thing. You don't want to lock into that support stream. If you have a long-term strategy for growing an Oracle software, that should be then you should go for it with a perpetual ULA. If it's a short-term growth, for example, we are doing this because we have a massive project that's going to require us to purchase licenses for X amount of millions, then the ULA is better. But if you have continuous process of growing and expanding on Oracle, for example, a company that decided we have a 100% Oracle strategy, then a perpetual ULA might make sense. But if you're just looking for, okay, we're doing this because we have a compliance issue here and we have to buy a lot of licenses, and the ULA is actually the better solution for buying it, a lot more cheaper, then just go with a normal ULA. Remember I talked about how you can optimize and maximize your ULA with VMware. If you're able to do that, that's much, much better than a perpetual ULA. Scenarios when you should not sign, well, it should be perpetual ULA. Don't sign a perpetual ULA and pay because you lack license management. And one event I attended, obviously it was before COVID, one company said, oh, but we're entering our unlimited pool out because we don't have any control of our licenses and we don't want to make Oracle upset. That's quite an expensive proposition to have that. If you have control of your Oracle environment, you should not need, well, at least you eliminate that reason. We talked about merger and acquisitions. Generally, Oracle ULAs are not good if you're in a business where there's lots of merger and acquisitions, just because of the 10% rule. At least that would be, I would be a bit cautious about both perpetual ULA and ULAs. And then, don't sign a perpetual ULA if you want to reduce Oracle cost, because obviously, once you sign any type of ULA contract with Oracle, you're making it 100 times more difficult to reduce your Oracle support costs. How can you exit your perpetual ULA? So you can't unless you have a contractual right to exit. You can try to you can negotiate this self-exit clause, as I said, or you're being acquired, right? But you can't okay, if we want to exit our ULA, let's be acquired. It doesn't really work like that. But you can't unless you have the contractual right to exit. You can possibly approach Oracle and say, we want to exit our ULA. Is that possible? Most likely it will require some sort of commercial transaction for Oracle to give you that right. Can you reduce support fees while in Oracle ULA or Pula? No, you can't. It's impossible. Because if you don't pay the support fees to Oracle, you're in breach, and Oracle can then terminate your contract and you have no licenses at all. How can I be non-compliant with my Oracle ULA or Pula? Well, deploying non-ULA software, contractual issues, legal entities, geography, cloud rights, other contractual violations. Why is a Pula risky? Well, we can't reduce support fees. There's no standard clause for it should be cloud usage rights. And how do you add new products as well? It's because you start with the Pula and you might start with a few products. How do you add more products to it? There's no mechanism for that. Pula funds. Not that common, but some companies exist, and I think it's important, or some agreement exists, but I think it's important to talk about it because it might be a good agreement in some cases. What is a pool of funds agreement? A pool of funds agreement works a bit like a prepaid credit card. You pay Oracle, let's use an easy figure, $1 million. And you pay that to Oracle in a pool of funds agreement, and you have a credit. And then Oracle will give you will select which products you want to be able to buy for this $1 million. For example, if we would have Oracle Database Enterprise Edition and WebLogic, Oracle would then put a fixed, highly discounted price on those products. We then have the ability to choose what products we want to buy for this $1 million. You pay Oracle some lump sum of money, and here's the catch. If you don't spend the money or the credit, Oracle will not give you a refund. Typically, this type of contract, anything, well, it's 1 to 3 years. Most common is 2 or 3 years. What's the contractual basics? It's the same. It's an Oracle ordering document. It looks almost the same. And pricing is anything from, well, $1 million, usually might be a little less. Generally, I have not seen any massive pool of funds. I've seen $1 to $5 million. Not a very common agreement. There's a reporting process, so that is described. There's no sort of certification process as ULA have, but there's a reporting process that you should be reporting your sort of deployments to Oracle, but Oracle is not really following up on this, speculating time issues. And here is a pool of funds. So you can all remember how this looks. This is the Oracle Database Enterprise Edition. You can see it's name user plus. You can have processor, name user plus. Quantities is to be decided, obviously, because we just paid Oracle $1 million. And then you can see here's the price. So this has been applied, we can assume maybe 70% discount. Basically, for this $1 million, we just need to report to Oracle, okay, we are buying 1,000 name user plus Enterprise Edition, and 1,000 multiplied by 99, it will be 99,000. Then Oracle is supposed to deduct that from the $1 million. And here is the contractual text describing this process. In consideration of the payment to Oracle of the license and technical support fees specified in this ordering document. So do you're listing certain products, you cannot buy other products not listed. So you need to tell Oracle which are the products that you want to be able to to take out to buy from this $1 million, or in this case, it's sterling. This was for a period of 3 years from the effective date of the ordering document, pool of funds period. You may use the pool of funds credit to deploy any combination of the programs listed in the pool programs table, provided that on the first and second anniversary of the effective date of this ordering document, 90 days prior to the expiration of the pool of funds period, and upon the expiration of the pool of funds period, you submit to Oracle license declaration reports, so LDRs, which essentially is which is the survey that you've deployed it on and how many licenses is there. Our experience, both working at Oracle and leaving Oracle, is that Oracle is not really following this up very well. Maybe it's because, well, they don't have time. It could be that the agreement is not that common, so they don't have a process for it, but just purely speculation. And here it says, at the end of the pool of funds period, any unused credit shall expire, and you shall not be entitled to any credit or refund of license fees following the end of the pool of funds period. So basic means that if you do not report or do not deploy to Oracle, if you don't do anything, you can lose $1 million, and you still have to pay a maintenance for that contract. And it says you continuously maintain support for any and all programs purchased pursuant to Section D. So Oracle is requiring you to pay support for the licenses that you purchase. Why can a pool of funds be risky? Well, you need to provide Oracle information this every year, 90 days before. You're supposed to be supplying them with a license deployment report. Is that something you want to do? You can try to negotiate that way and try to negotiate what are you actually reporting to Oracle. And then you can't terminate support for products locked by the agreement. And that actually covers, if you sign a pool of funds and you include database in that pool of funds, other pool of funds other database contracts that's not part of the CSI will not be able to terminate other CSI contracts as long as your pool of funds is valid. When should you consider pool of funds agreement? When you have a lot of products, but you don't really know which products that you need from Oracle. Flexibility. I wish we all could have $1 million or more to spend, but that's really the best thing. If you have re-architecting and building on Oracle and you have money to spend, could be a good agreement. It's better than a ULA in many sense, because once the pool of funds expires, you're not locked into, you haven't locked in all your legacy contract into one contract. Pool of funds also offer very high discounts, and you have the ability to choose what product mix you want. Here's a checklist for Oracle ULAs. I'm not going to cover that. We will upload this in the event page, but just customer definition, list all the subs, territory, worldwide, must have, technical support, you need to cap it on a 0%, cloud, can you exit with cloud deployments, limitations, try to remove that, price hold, maybe you have non-ULA software, and you might want to have a fixed price or discount to purchase them off of. License assignment and merger acquisitions, as we are writing, must. Okay, I'm actually a bit early here, so I'm proud of myself. Follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube. If you want more, go to the LinkedIn event page, sign up. Yeah, there's someone here. Yeah, I've heard it means something worse than trouble, actually, Madalena. So we have some Romanian friends, so it means something worse. We have a few minutes for questions, so if you have any questions, stick around, and we will be happy to answer them. I think in 2 weeks we have the Java licensing training.
Indeed. So it was an early one. You usually 10 minutes, 20 minutes over.
Yeah. But I was Martin, I could see, but your share was 34 slides. And then we're like, but the slide deck is 90 slides. And I realized, if I don't plow ahead here, I'm going to, be on slide 70 when the time runs over. Yeah. Java questions. Everybody have Java questions. But I think after the Java licensing training, you're still going to have questions, but you at least you're going to be have a good understanding of how to work with Java licensing. Okay, so there's a question here from Hi Castor. Could you please explain what happens after the pool of funds end? Will the perpetual licenses, right? Yes. Essentially, in the pool of funds agreement, you just go to Oracle and say, we want 50 of these now. We calculate how much money we have left for the credit. And when the pool of funds ends, you are able to keep all the licenses. It essentially becomes a big contract with all the licenses that you've decided to use with the pool of funds. Hello, Ankur. At the time of ULA exit, the license count at the end is taken into account, or the max number. Okay, so you count only the max number the day your ULA ends. It is not a high peak number during the ULA, so you need to make sure that you have the highest possible number when your ULA ends. So it's not like, you need to measure the maximum. It's actually on the day your ULA ends. You need to, how many do we have? And then you count it and give it that to Oracle. Thank you for attending via Hut. I think I pronounced your name correct. Any more questions?
There are plenty of opportunities. We're doing lots of training.
Morten, I know we're not going to talk about it, but Morten will send out time about when we're going to do the extra session about disaster recovery. That will be in 2 weeks. Exactly, Ankur. It's the number at the end that's counted for the ULA. Okay, guys, there's no more questions here. So we're going to end it with, our mission video because we like it. So see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. We started working with Oracle licensing over 15 years ago, and we've always been passionate about our work with licensing and contracts. Back when we started working at Oracle, we realized very quickly that Oracle had an advantage. They knew all the contracts and licensing rules, all while its customers were in a disadvantage with limited access to the very same information. We want to level the playing field by changing that. We often get asked, why do you share? Our philosophy is pretty simple, and it's always been, if you do good things will happen. To us, there are 2 groups of people out there. One group who will watch our videos, attend our training, and use that knowledge to better manage their Oracle software, and that's great. But there will also be people who need our Oracle licensing expertise. It's a win-win.
Oracle licensing is challenging and difficult. Almost no company in the world is able to stay compliant with their Oracle software licenses. But there are a few companies out there that have succeeded in remaining compliant with Oracle. We are obsessed with finding those companies, speak with them to understand how were they successful, and then we want to teach it to everybody else. The challenge with learning about Oracle licensing has always been that the few who had the knowledge did not want to share it with others. We want to be different. We want to share knowledge that we have, whatever knowledge that we gain, so that others can benefit from this knowledge as well. That is our mission.